I loved my childhood. Like, I loved school. It was pretty idyllic.
What was like the cultural makeup in your hometown?
Up until the age of 18, 95% of my interactions with people of color were people who were serving me in some form. How do you acknowledge your privilege and live with it, but also not feel like you have to walk around beating yourself up and being like, I'm so sorry to have been born in a fortunate position?
So here's what comes to mind immediately when you say that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's beautiful. So I'm here in Capetown. Today, we find ourselves at the Queen's Plate at the Kenilworth Waste Race Course. It's really interesting seeing the culture and the different class levels here in Capetown. So at the event that we're currently at now, you'll notice that there's mostly white people, but you'll also notice that throughout Capetown. One would think that if you're on the continent of Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that most likely you would encounter a population that was largely African. But because of the history here, that's not always the case. This is one of the more prestigious races. Show you the scenes and hopefully we'll meet some people. All around the world, we live with certain social and cultural dynamics that history created for us to sift and work through. During my first trip to South Africa years ago, I was perplexed and even a little disturbed by a few things I observed. So during this trip, I wanted to have conversations with people from different ethnic groups to gain a better understanding of those dynamics. This is a conversation with Grant Van Helsdingen. Hey man, I want to first of all appreciate you for being willing to chat with me today. Like I mentioned, man, it's just you and I having a conversation about life. What I wanted to chat with you today is obviously we traveled together for about a year with Remote Year. And at one point we were roommates in Valencia. Was that Valencia? Yeah, it was Valencia.
Yeah, it was.
And I wanted to chat with you because obviously you are South African. We're here in Cape Town, South Africa. And a part of my effort and mission with Extended Family is while I'm continuously exploring like culture and people in those places, learning about their personal experiences and background to help contextualize certain cultural dynamics there. And I think your perspective is unique and very meaningful to the entire scope of what culture is in South Africa. And so that's why we're chatting today.
Yeah, it's not an easy task, I think, trying to get a picture of culture in South Africa because it's so multifaceted and there are so many different groups within the country. Like, you obviously know that we have 11 official languages.
Yeah.
So I think if you compare it to a place like maybe like Australia is, I think, a much more homogenous place. So I have a very, I have a small insight into the culture of the groups that I grew up in.
Yeah.
But it's one part of it, like a bigger tapestry of very varied cultures.
Absolutely.
Which makes it a very interesting place. It's one of the things I love about it.
Absolutely. And that's why, like you said, it's so hard to get the pulse of a culture. And that's why, like, since I've been here, I wanted to go to Durban. I'm not going to get a chance to go to Durban while I'm here, but I at least wanted to get, okay, what are like some of the main, demographics or intersectionality? Well, not only in different cities, but just in the country at large. So what I did is, I talked, until now, I've spoken with a guy who's a Black South African who's an entrepreneur, who we talked about has the farmhouse 58 in Johannesburg and multiple businesses. There's another guy that I'm going to chat with. He's from the township. I'm going to chat with him and also talk about his experience and then also some travel history. And then
it'd be interesting to contrast those conversations.
Absolutely.
I'd be very interested to hear
Absolutely.
the same topics discussed by different people.
Absolutely. And then obviously you and I are going to have a chat. And we're going to get into your history in a little bit, but I want to talk about, just tell us about the neighborhood and where we're at right now.
Okay, so we are in at the top of Bree Street, which is in the CBD of Cape Town City. So we're surrounded by the mountains, and so like this is kind of central Cape Town, and Bree Street is one of the more well-known streets for like nightlife and restaurants, and it's kind of the hub of tourism and dining, and so it's a very cosmopolitan area. There's a lot of tourists in this area. You can walk the streets pretty safely. Maybe not at night, but it's pretty like traversable by foot. So yeah, I've been living here for about a year. Um, it's been wonderful. It feels like I feel very connected to the vibe of the city here. You can hear it from outside. Like we often just sit on the balcony and we can kind of like the ambiance of the city.
Yeah.
Which is I like that. I like the buzz of it. And I've lived in a few places around Cape Town the past 10 years. I used to live up against the mountain there in a sort of quieter suburb that was a bit more removed. And obviously grew up in Stellenbosch, which is like just outside of Cape Town. So it's a very small city, but I think your experience is quite different. You can be like maybe 2 kilometers away, and you'll have quite a different experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, based on your surroundings.
Yeah, and you know what? So, like you were saying, so many different neighborhoods have different vibes, and right behind us is Table Mountain, and the view from here is incredible. It's an incredible view, and 2 streets down is Kloof Street. And is that how you say it?
Kloof, yeah.
Okay, Kloof.
Kloof, yeah.
Kloof.
Afrikaans.
It's Afrikaans. Okay, and so we're by Kloof Street.
Yeah.
And that street,
like Kloof means like valley.
oh, it does. And that street's had like so much energy. Actually happened to eat at Kloof Street House.
Yes.
The other
one of it's super popular. So like between Kloof and Bree are the two main streets in the CBD that have like the highest concentration of restaurants and bars and stuff, and sort of epicenter of socializing in the CBD.
So, Grant, I want to. You told me you're from a place called Stellenbosch, and before coming here, I had no context or clue like what that is. I think all of our birthplaces are so instrumental and consequential to who we are as a person. So, tell me a little bit more, if you don't mind, about just Stellenbosch and growing up in Stellenbosch, what that was like for you.
Yeah, so Stellenbosch, it was a wonderful place to grow up. So it's a historic town. It's got a lot of history. It was one of the original settlements that, like, when the first colonizers came from, like, Holland and
The Dutch.
yeah, the Dutch. So my surname is Van Helsdingen. So my ancestors came on the ships.
Okay.
And they started.
It's funny. I was always going to ask you, because I mean, obviously, I've seen your last name many times, but I was like, how do you pronounce it? Can you do it one more time?
Well, it's phonetic, but like Van Helsdingen if you're Afrikaans.
Okay.
But English Van Helsdingen.
That sounded like the exact fucking thing. So no, one more time, just so I get it right. I always want to pronounce people.
I would say Grant Van Helsdingen.
Grant Van Helsdingen.
Yeah, VAN and then Helsdingen.
Okay.
HELS.
Van Helsdingen. Was it close?
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay.
I mean, listen, I like even in 5 years of high school, my teachers never said that.
Really?
It's also a very easy surname to say. You just read it, but it's just long, so people just go blah 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 at the end.
Van Helsdingen. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Stellenbosch. Historically, it's the wine region, so it's a big tourist destination. It's a very like quaint town. There's like cobbled streets, a lot of like art galleries, and it's very like cultural, and it's quieter, and it's like quite a privileged, like I don't know what I would compare it to, maybe a city in the States where there's like a neighboring affluent smaller town that you still have access to the city, but like it's a little bit more suburban. There are a lot of great schools there, so I went to primary school there, and then for high school I went to a school on a wine farm outside of the town. So I had an amazing childhood there. My parents settled there. They used to live in Botswana. My dad was an engineer, and then moved. They bought a house in Stellenbosch. So I grew up there from the age of like 1. And it was it was a bubble. I think we had this conversation before. It was a very sort of privileged bubble to grow up in. Like most of my friends were of the same sort of socio-economic level. I mean, not that we were super wealthy or anything, but we, you know, we could like walk on the streets at night. Like we expected a level of like security there. Yeah, it's like very beautiful surroundings. You're also surrounded by mountains and vineyards and stuff. So yeah, I had a really lovely childhood.
So you say your dad was an engineer.
Yes.
Is he still an engineer now?
So he's an engineer by qualification, but he started a construction company. So he builds like apartment buildings.
Okay, that's cool. So he's like almost. So does he like actual construction, or does he also do like development?
Originally it was construction, and then over the years, sort of
Okay, so-
as his business grew, he now like they like find properties and then he gets funding to like build an apartment block and then they'll sell the apartments.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess he's a developer now, but really he's a pilot more than anything. Like his real passion is flying, so that's his like side hustle. But that also over the years progressed, so now he flies like private jets for super rich people.
That's super cool.
So he gets to do what he loves and like make money out of it. So
That's
he's
beautiful.
always on trips. You know.
How about your mom?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so she's an interesting woman. Has like woman of many different interests and stuff. Like the one uniting factor for them is that they both love the bush, so they're like wildlife obsessed. They're always going on like elaborate camping trips and lodges and stuff. So my mom, that was like she was a game ranger when she was younger. She's done a lot of like voluntary helping out with like vets in the national parks and stuff. So that's her major passion. But she stays at home. She plays a lot of golf now.
And she plays golf.
Yeah, but people are scared of her. The other thing about Stellenbosch, and one of the reasons why I wanted to leave it when I finished high school, is that it is a very small community, and like my parents have lived there for like 30 years now, and everyone knows everyone's business.
Wow.
And you basically see the same people all the time, and I think that bothered my mom too. She felt a bit trapped there over the years, for sure. She also felt like it wasn't really her people. Maybe she found them a bit stuffy, or
Where is she from? Is it because she's not from that place?
yeah. So she's from Johannesburg originally, and then she met my dad at Stellenbosch University. So they met at university there, because Stellenbosch is like a big university town. But she was always like the more liberal, because Stellenbosch is very Afrikaans, and Afrikaans and conservative are quite synonymous.
Okay, that's helpful
She's
context.
English, and so she used to like when she was in res at university, she would get like hate mail under her door because she would wear pants while riding a bicycle instead of a skirt.
Wow.
And this was obviously like in the 80s, so a lot more conservative now. But she didn't really fit in with what we would call verkrampt in Afrikaans, which means like literally means like cramped, but like what it means is like conservative.
Oh, wow. And so when you say Afrikaans and conservative are kind of synonymous, and you use that word, which I won't try to repeat, and it means conservative, but it sounds like it's something that's prideful, right? It sounds like something that's
Yeah, there is, no, for sure. There's a very strong identity and like unique cultural identity for Afrikaans people, but I guess the equivalent would be that obviously not all Afrikaans people are conservative, but the stereotype of an Afrikaans person is like, I guess the US version would be like a hillbilly, or like they were the original farmers. So like another word for an Afrikaans person in Afrikaans is boer, which literally means farmer.
okay.
So it's like country people, really. It's not really the case anymore. Obviously, they're very cosmopolitan Afrikaans people and stuff, but like certain towns, in farming towns, generally in the Western Cape, if you go to a farming town, most of the people will be Afrikaans.
Okay.
Like farming is in the cultural heritage of Afrikaans. And so my family I'm a little bit of both. Like my grandfather was Afrikaans on my dad's side, but my grandparents on my mom's side were German, English.
Oh, wow.
But I grew up speaking English. My first language is
Is
English.
it? Oh, really?
Yeah.
But you also speak Afrikaans?
Yeah, so like my neighbors in Stellenbosch, all the kids I played with were all Afrikaans. So,
Oh, wow.
So I spoke Afrikaans from a young age, and we have to take it as a language up until you finish high school. So yeah, I'm fluent in Afrikaans, but I would identify as English.
Oh wow. Okay, so how many languages do you speak, Grant? Because
Two.
two, English and
English and
Afrikaans.
Afrikaans.
Because I feel like not only a sentiment across, I think outside of the United States, it's almost people speak two languages by default.
Most people, yeah, I would
Yeah.
say, like European countries, they would speak their native language and English.
Yeah.
And it's the same here. Like most people who aren't first language English will be fluent in English because that's how you get by. It's the universal language, right?
Absolutely.
It's the language of business and correct. So, like, if you walk into it's funny. I spoke about this with my friends. Like, if you walk into a room and there's seven Afrikaans people and like one English person, everyone will speak English,
Wow.
which is it's strange, but like people kind of feel like they have to default to English. And so I've been making a conscious effort lately to actually speak Afrikaans to my Afrikaans friends and not expect them to always speak English to me.
Yeah.
And it's been great because it's good practice. And I actually love the language. It's really expressive. Yeah.
And so I'm gonna do a quick. Okay, I'm just doing a quick camera
Check.
check. You know, it sucks when you're having a great conversation and you get none of it. But okay, so we're good. But so I want to talk more about Afrikaans. So you say it's a beautiful language. So the foundation of Afrikaans, doesn't it derive from Dutch,
Dutch. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so basically when the Cape was settled by the Dutch, and then there was like a whole melting. Look, I'm not a historian, so don't quote me. But, basically, the history of Cape Town is Malaysians, Indonesians. Obviously, there was slave trade, Dutch people. There were Portuguese. I think some French presence. So a lot of different things. But it's funny when I meet Dutch people today. To them, Afrikaans sounds like old Dutch,
Oh
like
wow.
kitchen Dutch. So basically, it's Dutch from like a few hundred years ago that stopped progressing with the rest of Holland's evolution of Dutch to modern Dutch, and then it picked up its own idiosyncrasies and stuff. So it's like I think the term for it would be a Creole language. It's
Like a mixture.
but it is an official language now. But it's an offshoot of Dutch that kind of
Understood.
became its own thing.
So if you were to have a conversation with a Dutch person, would they be able to understand you?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they probably understand us. Well, yeah, so they think we sound very quaint. It's like very formal.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
very
almost like
proper.
if I were to speak Shakespeare in English to you,
Yeah.
that's the way that I speak English. So yeah, they would understand. And I can read Dutch and like
Oh, okay.
understand most of it, yeah. It's very there's a strong overlap.
That's super cool. So Botswana, what's the like? So your dad was, he said he was working there, or
Yeah, so he worked on a mining town there as an engineer.
okay,
Shortly after that, my parents got married. So my brother was born there. I wasn't born there because after my brother was born there, they were like the medical facilities here are not good enough. So my mom flew down to Cape Town to have me, but we lived there for like the first I think like 2 years of my life.
yeah.
I don't really remember it, but they had a great time there. A lot of their friends that they met there, they're still friends with today.
The reason I asked is because you were talking about just English influence, German influence,
Yeah.
Dutch, etc. And I was wondering, like, from my understanding, different parts of at least this southern area of Africa, not South Africa, the country, have German influence.
Yeah.
Does Botswana have German?
Namibia.
Namibia.
Namibia is
Okay.
like we have Afrikaans. Most Namibians would speak German.
Okay.
I guess because of the history. I think Namibia was like a colony of
Okay.
Germany.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that.
That makes sense.
So that's like their primary language other than English.
That makes sense. So that's interesting, and I appreciate the context with your mom, not only your family background, but just talking about Stellenbosch because I think it gives me better context as well. So does she still are your parents together if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah.
Okay, and so they still in Stellenbosch.
They still live in the same house that I grew up in.
Oh shit.
They're happy there. Like I don't think they'll ever move, and they've firmly established themselves in the community and their friends there and stuff. So they are worse places to be
Absolutely.
honest. It's nice.
That's nice. That's nice. And so when you said that Stellenbosch is a town that's like a suburb of like a more metropolitan city, what would you compare it to? I mean, we traveled together, for a year. You've been to a lot of places. Just for context, for me, when you say that, there's so many different levels I can go to. I can say it's a Hampton to New York City. That's a big difference. Or I could say it's a
Like
Orange County to
Yeah.
LA. or
Something along those lines, like a sort of affluent university town that's
okay.
near a city.
Uh-huh.
So I guess like isn't Stanford kind of, or like where Massachusetts is in
Ah,
Boston, there's like the university town and there's like old oak trees and historic
yeah,
buildings
yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff, and it's sort of not in the city, but it's a short drive away from the city.
Absolutely.
There's like a lot of young people, obviously, because a large population, part of the population are students. So we
Absolutely.
used to like everyone used to party in Stellenbosch when we were in high school because all the bars and stuff, because they had so many students and, first years are 18, that was the place where we could actually get into bars at the age of like 16 or 17
Yeah.
because there were so many young people. And I used to use like my brother's student card as identification to get
Uh-huh.
into the bars when I was like 16.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's so cool. What's the legal drinking age here?
18.
18. Man, I wish.
Yeah.
All right, all right, so that's a great foundation. So, Grant, one last thing I'll say, because I feel like we got a great foundation. Is how would you describe like growing up in Stellenbosch? How would you describe like your childhood? And I don't want to, yeah. How would you describe it?
I was like, I have a lot of issues with my parents, and I think we all do. Parents like do the best they can. But the one thing I will say for my child is that it was pretty carefree for the most part.
Yeah,
Like my parents had like bad marital issues and there were financial troubles at times, but they isolated us from that completely. And my mom was like an excellent, strict mother, but like she was excellent at like instilling like good behavior into us, and like a lot of the things that I didn't like her for when I was younger, I'm really grateful for now. So
hmm,
my childhood was great, and like I only really realized this in my late 20s, and like now that the childhood I had is not everyone's experience, and I kind of took it for granted. And a lot of the people I've met over the years traveling who've shared their experiences growing up made me really grateful for the home environment that my parents gave to us. The opportunities they gave to us. They sacrificed a lot to send me to an expensive private school, which at the time I didn't realize how much that cost them, but it actually cost them their like dream house that they were
really.
trying to build at the time. And my dad was just overextended with his finances, so then he had to sell this property that he'd been building on this house on a farm that they intended to move to. And that was like sort of right in the peak of my brother was at university and I was at this expensive school, so the fees for that kind of took precedence. So they sacrificed for us, and yeah, they never showed it. I loved my
Yeah,
childhood. Like I loved school. Any like any problems up until basically an adult, and it was pretty idyllic. Obviously, there were issues too. Like I was um, always a bit of an outsider in my family in the sense that like it's me and my brother and my dad, and my mom, and my dad and my brother had a very strong bond over things like hunting and fishing and camping and
oh,
stuff.
yeah.
And I was always the little weird kid in the corner reading books and being dragged along on these like family holidays that weren't really my vibe. But
Yeah.
I would just go and sit inside and read a lot. um, but yeah, I look back on my childhood fondly. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So it sounds like when, you're describing your childhood and the area you grew up in, it seems as though when you've gotten a chance to experience different places
Mm.
through travel and talk to other people, that you've developed even more of a sense of like pride, uh,
Yeah, and appreciation.
appreciation. Yeah.
And also just the area that we grew up in. Like I took Stellenbosch and Capetown and the Western Cape for granted, but it's really like one of the most beautiful places in the world,
Wow.
and the access we have to like nature and beaches and just forests, and like, we had this amazing forest just above our house that we could go walk in and like hikes, and um, I just thought that was normal,
Yeah.
but we're very lucky to live there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing. So, in the context of just South Africa generally, like we've discussed, you said 11 different languages. From my understanding, there's 11 different provinces. Is that correct?
Mm, I mean, make me.
Okay.
No, I don't think there are 11. I think there's like 8.
Okay. So the 11 languages, many different provinces. From my experience, like experiencing in South Africa, I'd say like it's an extremely diverse place.
Yeah.
You have Durban that has the second highest population of Indians outside of India.
Yeah.
You got so much of, uh, I guess I'll say a mixture going on because of history. You got Cape Malay, and then as a result of a little bit of history and apartheid, people are classified differently, which also doesn't really perfectly fit in any classification. Of course, you got so many different tribes, of the original tribes here in so many different languages. So with that context, how would you describe like Stellenbosch, like culturally? What was like the cultural makeup
Yeah.
in your hometown?
Very, very sort of insulated from. It was predominantly white,
Hmm.
probably like 60-70% Afrikaans white and like 30% English white, which is quite a distinction. Like it's a very distinct like cultural groups. We also had obviously there were other groups too, but yeah,
Let me
it's
I just want to get clear on something. So when you say, because it seems like it's something I wasn't aware of.
yeah.
So I was I've been learning about the history, but you're saying the Afrikaans white and the English white are distinct cultural groups. So how
Right.
so? Tell me how so.
Just I mean, what makes up culture? It's like the way you socialize. It's the food you eat.
Yeah.
It's what you do. What your ceremonies are. What your group like rituals are. That you know. What do you do on a birthday? How do you celebrate a birthday? How do you celebrate this? They're very different, and I guess just general outlook and attitudes towards things. Um, I would say that like if you wanted to label it, like white people would probably be labeled as more liberal.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's like
Like the English white, you
Afrikaans
mean?
people are Republicans,
Oh,
white
okay.
people are Democrats,
Okay, okay.
English people are Democrats.
Okay, okay.
So obviously an oversimplification. But yeah, the like Afrikaans music, that's a whole thing. You'll know it. Like if you go to an Afrikaans braai, it's very different than if you go to an English braai.
Oh, wow.
Like in the way that it's done and the food and the roles that people take, the gender roles. Like yeah,
Wow. That's
it's
dope.
interesting. But they're lovely, lovely people. Like it's the most hospitable, welcoming, friendly people. So yeah, I think I underappreciated. Like I've been trying to lean into my Afrikaans heritage a bit more
Mm-hmm.
living here because I felt like I lost it a little bit. Like growing up in Stellenbosch and in primary school, I had a lot of Afrikaans friends, and I was probably more fluent in Afrikaans when I was younger. And then the high school that I went to was predominantly English, so there weren't like I think there were like 6 of us who did first language Afrikaans classes in my high school, and everyone else did second language. So yeah, my Afrikaans side was much more when I was in Stellenbosch and younger.
So that's helpful context, understanding the just the cultural dynamics or differences between English and Afrikaans. So you were saying that it was about, you said 60 to 70% white, some part
It was quite a big
English.
colored community.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say like white and colored community. It's gotten more diverse since I grew up there, which is great. Obviously, like the efforts have been in the country at large is to like create a middle class that is diverse and not drawn across race lines, which is what it has been historically. So whereas like when I grew up in my neighborhood, the houses they were all white families. But now that I go back there and some of them are not anymore, which is nice to see. Like people who have the same means being able to buy a house in these historically sort of affluent white suburbs. They become more diverse in the years, which
No,
is great.
that's so dope. Yeah. So I think that gives us a good context of Stellenbosch. And you know me, man. I'm always interested to understand like the context and get to the root of things,
Yeah.
because I think people can make assumptions of what people are like from many cultural backgrounds here in like South Africa, because obviously the glaring stamp of South Africa is apartheid,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so when you think about apartheid, and you think about even just the difference in dynamics between Johannesburg and Cape Town, like a lot of people perceive, and I feel like I've experienced Cape Town a little to be, I think, a little bit, have a little bit more remnants of apartheid, still more so than like other places.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. There's definitely, I'm not sure of the roots of it, but it's very true that if you go to Johannesburg and you go to like an upmarket restaurant, it would be a whole mix. It would
Yeah.
be people of color, it would be white people. And here, generally, it's like a restaurant would acquire an identity as being a black,
Yeah.
like a black restaurant or like a white restaurant. And obviously, that's not the case always, but like certain places cater to one or the other.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that even arises. I don't think it's a conscious thing, but maybe like people just gravitate to their own groups and then they kind of establish themselves in a place, and then maybe other groups subconsciously feel unwelcome in that space.
Yeah. I think it's partially that, but I think, you know, different people, like whether it's business, whether it's politics, or whether it's cultural dynamics, I think sometimes people kind of, as a result of history, maybe intentionally dictate like, hey, this is how we like things. And then after so many years,
It's just the
if
way
there's
it
no
is.
intentional, yeah, if there's no intentional effort to kind of change the dynamics,
Of course.
or then things kind of persist in that way. So when you're talking about like a restaurant, for instance, like one thing that I've noticed since I've been here in Cape Town specifically, I think it's a dynamic I've noticed like in Johannesburg as well, but even more so in Cape Town, is that like if I go into a restaurant, right, all of the wait staff, well, on most occasions, most
Yeah.
of the wait staff, if not all, are going to be black, right?
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily an issue,
Yeah.
but
But you notice it.
no. What I'm saying is it's not necessarily an issue, but the thing is, it's like that whether it's like that and the whole restaurant be white,
Yeah.
right? But what's with the nuanced part about that is the wait staff will be black, like the whole restaurant be white, but the manager
Would be white.
of the wait staff, it'll be white.
Or the hostess at the door would be
Yeah.
like a pretty white girl seating people.
And so I've noticed that not only in restaurants, but in other businesses as well. It can be like retail. Everyone will be
service
black.
jobs.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, a white manager will pop out.
Yep.
Now, to me, that seems specific, you know, and intentional. And I don't know, like, of course, again, we know the history, but it's like, that's really, you know, that's
Isn't the
period to
I
me.
mean, wouldn't the equivalent of that be like in the States where it would be like maybe a Mexican people doing service jobs? Is that not the case there?
No. So the thing is, and I think that's a good question. Um, I think that's a good question, right? I think you can say that in different places there are okay, specifically in the States, since that's where I'm from. There are a lot of there are Hispanic people and then historically black people that may do different service jobs, whether it be keeping of the home or whether it may be
Yeah,
landscape.
like
And
the
of course,
stereotype of like your Mexican cleaner.
right. And of
Yeah.
course, we're obviously overgeneralizing drastically.
Yeah, sure.
But I would say I don't. So, because what I'm talking about right now is specifically in a restaurant. I think when you go, for instance, I worked in a restaurant. I was a server. So I worked in the service like during college and after college. But the difference for me is when I was a server, we had, it didn't matter who like it wasn't, it was a mixture.
It wanted to cross
No, no,
race
no,
lines.
no. It was like, you know, I could have had like a literally a girl that's getting her PhD next to me.
Yeah.
I gotta have a girl that's from, you know, the hood next to me.
Yeah.
Like it was different. And then you could have multiple managers. I've had, you know, white men, black men, white women. You know what I mean? So many. And I've lived in different places. I've lived in
So what
Virginia.
what is the distinction there that gets someone manager position? It's like their level of education,
No, I mean it's not the level of education. I think
just the
again.
potential that they've
Well,
merit.
I think of course, this is again generalizing because whatever your restaurant group is, the establishment, the city you work in, there's going to be different dynamics. But from my experience, it was either you had there's always going to I feel like in the history of America, and I think it may be similar here. There's always going to be like even if it's just a little bit, it's going to be a little bit of a racial dynamic or consideration because we all are again have been influenced by the world that we've
And the
grown up in.
legacy of like white domination over,
Yeah,
it's the legacy of the world.
yeah,
And it's clearly felt here because like apartheid wasn't that long ago. When I was born, it had just ended.
yeah,
We were like the first kids who were born free. And I didn't see those things. Well, I didn't really realize them until I was an adult. Again, because growing up in Stellenbosch was a bubble, so I was surrounded by people who were very similar to me, with the
right,
same backgrounds. But you're right in saying that up until the age of 18, 95% of my interactions with people of color were people who were serving me in some form,
yeah,
cleaning my house, filling the car with
yeah.
petrol, waiters, that kind of stuff.
And Grant, I want to be clear, like in this
But
conversation. No, I want to be clear because we talked about this before, but I want to make it like clear even while we're sitting here. I'm not trying to in any way shame you for your lived
no, I don't
experience.
think you are.
You know what I mean? But I want to finish the thought and answer your
Yeah.
question when you're talking about the service. It was, um, it was just a little bit. While we may have every place that we come from is going to have remnants of history.
Yeah.
And we may
Yeah.
have like troubling
Yeah.
things. But the reason I brought it up is it's just a little bit different from my experience. And here it seems as though almost as a standard that, okay, if you have, wait staff or service staff, or again, it could be
Yeah.
retail or even in business,
Yeah.
that even if everyone's black, the
Someone
manager,
won't be.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not asking you
No, I
why.
think you're. I
You know
think
what I
you're
mean?
100% right. That is generally the case.
Yeah.
I don't. It could. I suspect it's subconscious bias. I think it's that someone who's hiring, and it's like fucked up to say, but someone who's hiring is probably gonna assume a white person is more capable
Yeah.
or more educated or can conduct themselves more professionally.
You know, I
There's
was
definitely some deeply entrenched biases that people don't even realize, and it's just the way that it's always been.
yeah, I was listening to a guy the other day who's also South African. I think he would probably be described as colored here. And it's interesting, even the color distinction is interesting because it could mean that someone was of mixed race, but it could also mean that, you know, sometimes it means that they literally could be of Indian descent and
Yeah,
be colored. Like there's no
there's no clear
clear,
distinction.
yeah.
Yeah,
But he was saying that it was interesting because he was like, I was a professional, you call them footballers here. He was basically a soccer player.
no,
He's like,
we say soccer.
yeah, you can say soccer.
Yeah,
What's footballer then?
football is the UK.
No, he calls it footballer. He said he was a footballer.
I feel like that's probably Americanized though. Like when we in school, we would say I play soccer. I
Really?
don't play football. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. But then maybe through the influence of like TV and media and stuff,
No,
it's not the
because,
same football.
oh, okay, understood.
Yeah.
In the UK, TV and media.
Yeah, like I guess globally more people call it football than
Okay.
soccer, right?
So he was saying that he played professionally, right, for this period of time,
Yeah.
and that he was having this experience where I think they were going to be either playing in a tournament or teaching, and they decided that he needed a mentor. The mentor was half his age, you know what I mean, and but was they felt more comfortable with him as the mentor, the leader of it because he was
Because it was
white,
white.
and he was like, well, this kid has like not even close to half the experience that I have.
It's like racial nepotism.
Yeah,
It's like automatically afforded a certain level of trust.
yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think it's something that exists in the United States as well, but it seems more glaring here. And I think you make a good point as well, is that contextually the apartheid was in the 90s.
Yeah, like
You know
the
what I mean?
80s, ended in the early 90s, and it also just didn't end overnight. You can say, oh, it's over, but like, what does that
Yeah.
practically mean when you've physically moved entire groups of people to places and like ruined education for generations. It takes many years for that shit to come back.
Absolutely.
And
And
also
intentional effort.
an intentional effort, which our government hasn't been the best at doing either. Like our government actually made all these promises to the people who were the victims of apartheid, and then many of them were not followed through.
Yeah.
And so we end up with like an elite ruling class of black people, but not disseminating the money to the masses that need it, creating the jobs and the education and stuff. And it's been 30 years, but for many people, they're still in the same situation that they were in the 80s.
Yeah. And it is
Townships and, living far away from the places where you work, only having access to menial service jobs, like minimum wage, that kind of stuff. People live in grinding poverty as a result. And also the problem is lifting yourself out of that kind of poverty is essentially impossible, because what happens is, like, for example, I would study with people and we would both be doing a degree in computer science, and we would get a job outside of university and we might be earning the same amount of money, but the money that I was earning was my money. My parents didn't need it. It was solely for my expenses and my use. But for every one person from a township who gets a degree at university, there's 1,000 that didn't, and there's a whole extended family back in the township that need food and stuff. So all their money just gets drained immediately to support their communities, and you often have like one person supporting 20 people. So it makes it all the more difficult to like up your earning potential and get better jobs and stuff, because you're just trying to keep everyone alive.
Most definitely. I think, that, you know what, that makes sense. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking is, I think your country has done a lot better job actually than the United States. You say they haven't done a great job, and we know like the dynamics are as a result of, I guess, again, I need to get more sharper in my history, but the peace agreement was that, the Black South Africans would have political power, but it made it so that the economic power still remained with many of, the white South Africans, and those dynamics still persist today, is what you're describing.
Well, it's funny you say that, because there are a group of businessmen based in Stellenbosch who are like the founders of the main banks, and they're billionaires, and there's like the top 10 wealthiest list. A lot of them are concentrated in Stellenbosch, and they actually called the Stellenbosch Mafia.
Oh, wow.
And they are like, depending on how much of a conspiracy theorist you are, like pulling the strings behind the scenes in government. And I think for a large part they do, because money influences policy in government always, in any country. But you're right in saying that the wealth was concentrated over the whole entirety of apartheid. The wealth was concentrated with white people. And as a result, I have the benefit of generational wealth.
Right.
Almost by default, like, you can assume a white person, obviously not everyone, but like you can assume a white person, if they got fired from their job or whatever, at the very least they could move back to their parents' house and be supported by their parents, or they have some sort of a safety net. And so that frees you up to do a lot more with your time and the risks that you can take, and the ventures that you can do, because you come from a background that could catch you if you fall.
Absolutely.
A lot of black people don't have that. It's like make it or break it. There's no one back at home who's gonna like catch you. So there's a lot more at stake. And that's huge, because I've taken some crazy risks. Growing on remote here was a big risk for me, but like my thinking was, if all else fails, I'll just fly home and go live with mom and dad for a while and get another job. That's the worst that could happen. Like, I didn't fear being bankrupt. And it's interesting.
And it's funny, man. It's just hearing you talk, but also just understanding the history about South Africa. And I was telling another friend this. It's like there's so many similarities. Like just the same dynamics that you're articulating. Like when we're talking about generational wealth, or we're talking about just a set of comfort and foundation that some people have. And of course, by and large, like in the States, it would be similar.
Yeah.
Of course, again, you have different socioeconomic economic classes, and everybody. So some people had in spite of history, may have been able to move a little bit further ahead than some other people, but it does not mean that history still isn't a significant factor, in their existence. So there's black people at home that similarly. I mean, I grew up in the middle class. My parents, my dad. So my parents met in the Air Force. I don't know if we had this conversation.
I didn't know that. No.
Okay, so my parents were both in the Air Force. My dad is from Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay.
My mom is from Dallas, Texas, South Side, which is what we would call, which is the hood. She's from South Dallas. My dad's from Plainfield, New Jersey, and he grew up. I'd say he probably grew up middle class as well. His parents were teachers.
Okay.
My grandmother went to college. She was a teacher, and my grandfather was a teacher, and he even, I think, was a councilman.
Okay.
My mother, her parents, my grandfather was a blue collar worker, and my grandmother worked in Neiman Marcus. And I say my grandfather was a blue collar worker because I don't know specifically what he did. He was
Like a tradesman.
he was part of his life he was partially like a hustler, but he also he worked with. I used to, when I was young, and he was older at this point, but we would collect pallets and take them to a yard and like drop them off, like wooden pallets.
What, in exchange for like a connection fee or
Yeah, I
something?
don't
Yeah.
I don't really know
Yeah.
specifically. I need to get a little bit more clear on that. But my parents, at young people, they both went into the Air Force, and they met in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which is super fucking cold, and it's North Dakota, man. It's like no.
So, the question for you, did they join the Air Force because that was an economic opportunity?
Yes.
Yeah. They didn't want to be
No,
in the Air Force.
that wasn't an aspiration.
Yeah.
It's a necessity.
Yeah.
And from when my dad always says it's interesting. He says he actually, it's interesting. He had different opportunities than even I had. It's also interesting when you think about time too, right? Different generations and different times, certain resources cost differently. So
And different opportunities were present.
right. So I say that to say that my dad went to boarding school.
Yeah.
He got sent to military boarding school by his parents, my grandparents, because as he says, like he wasn't acting right. But that's still like that's a privilege,
Yeah.
like
Boarding school is like, it's a fancy thing to do.
yeah, it sounds like it. And I
Yeah.
need to ask him more about his experience because I don't believe it was fancy, but
Yeah.
still, like going to boarding school
It's like, yeah, if you're a boarder, it typically means you're going to like a pretty well-off, probably
yeah, yeah,
private school. Yeah.
yeah.
It costs a lot of money.
And so I want to ask him more about his experience. I know it's military boarding, so he definitely says he attributes like a lot of his structure and his discipline to that.
Yeah.
And then I think that's probably was also the gateway for him to go into the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
But he still didn't have like again, I'm telling you this, but I know from just knowing my family, it wasn't like they still were like low middle class.
Yeah,
You know what I
things
mean?
weren't handed to.
No,
Yeah.
no. I mean, even my grandparents, like again, they were
Yeah.
both teachers.
Yeah.
And just to give you a little bit of context, my grandfather, I believe, was born in 1925. My grandmother was born in 1930, and my dad was born in 1963. Right? Is that right? 60,
Sounds about right.
no, 25. I might be wrong about the years because I know actually that's not right. My grandmother was even older than that. I think she was born in 25. And yeah, she was born in 25, I think, and my grandfather was born in 20, something around that. But my parents, they were older when they had my dad. I say that to say, and he was born in 63. So them being teachers, at that time that they were teachers, they still had limitations on what they could do in
Yeah.
the United States.
Sure, there were
Right.
natural
They were
rules around, like
right.
women could only be teachers or like nurses.
Well, not only that, it's just they were also black. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I'm painting that picture as well. But I say that. So my dad went to boarding school. My parents, because my dad was, apparently not doing what he's supposed to do, didn't have really a pathway, thought like, hey, the military is my pathway to success. I have to do something with my life. He decided to make a change. My my mother had gone to community college. She was living with her sister, her older sister in Houston, uh, and was like, okay, I need to do something differently in my life. I need to make a change. And she went into the Air Force, and they got stationed at Grand Forks, North Dakota, is where they met. And long story short, they got married, moved to Vegas. That's where
Been there ever since.
that yeah, been there, moved around a little
Yeah.
bit after as we got older, but that's home.
Yeah.
Um, shit, what was the point of me saying
The
that?
point, well, we were talking about is like the opportunities that they had the options to take to
Oh
better
no.
themselves.
Well, I was trying to paint that picture because you were talking about just dynamics and opportunities that people have in different
Yeah.
socioeconomic circumstances,
Yes.
but also racial dynamics in different countries, and saying that different people may not have that as a result of history.
Yeah.
I painted that picture to
Yeah.
say, while while our history definitely like impacts us, I'm saying that I came from, as a result, my parents were in the Air Force. My dad became a firefighter.
Yeah, like
He
they had opportunities available to them.
Well, I'm saying like he became a firefighter. My mother became a corrections officer. That was their career, and as a result of that foundation that they built for themselves, I got to live
You
a
benefit.
lower middle for
Yeah.
like I got to live a middle class life
Yeah.
as well. To say that if I took a crazy risk and something that happened, I could go home
Yeah.
as well.
And
And
they weren't like a lot of parents are relying on their children to support them.
right, and my parents
And
definitely,
that like so bizarre.
yeah.
It's like if my parents asked me for money, I would be so taken aback. But that is the case for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And in saying that, I also have, I think privilege is an important word
Yeah.
because I think, I always say this, Grant. I say, if I could ever give a TED talk on anything, have you ever had that question or you've heard this? If you can give a TED talk on anything, I've heard that on,
It's an interesting question.
I'd give a TED talk on privilege.
Privilege. Yeah.
The reason I would be is because I think that that word is a sword. It's used as a sword and somewhat of a shield, but I think it's so much more nuanced. And if people realize that all of our lived experience is this privilege, right? In the
There's
United States,
so many different forms of privilege.
absolutely.
Yeah.
In the United States, we often use that word, and we kind of specifically tie it to um, privilege of being a white person in
Yeah.
the United States, which is incredibly valid, but
Yeah.
there's so much more
Yeah.
nuance. And I think
It's so yeah, and people get very defensive about it too because they
yeah,
don't want to acknowledge their own privilege and they say, "But I had it bad in this way." And
absolutely,
the point is, I'm not saying you didn't
absolutely,
have it bad. Just saying in this particular narrow avenue, you have an advantage.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what you just said is usually how we're trying to explain it
Yeah.
from defensive white people, to be
Yes,
honest.
100%.
But it's so applicable to all of us. And
Yeah.
that's why I'd give a TED talk on it, because there's so much nuance. And if we realize that we all exist in
Like you
certain,
might not have white privilege, but you have tall privilege.
yeah, I mean, that's pretty flippant. But yeah, but I mean, like, I may not have, the privilege of being a white person, but I still have the privilege of growing up in a middle class
Yeah.
household.
Or
Like,
yeah, an
you know what I mean?
education or
Absolutely.
yeah.
So many. Or for instance, a person may not have the same socioeconomic privilege that I have had, but they grew up in a metropolitan city, which to me carries its own privilege.
own privilege,
They've been
yeah.
exposed to things that doesn't matter how,
Yeah.
let's just say
Geographic privilege.
exactly. Even if my family was rich,
Yeah.
I couldn't have experienced the things
Yeah.
you did because
In every
you
aspect of the
proximity
life.
privilege.
Yeah, proximity privilege. So here's a question for you: like, if you know that you are privileged for something that you did not choose, so your race, like maybe your nationality, even, or being born into a rich family, or whatever it is, how do you conduct yourself? You can't. I'm confronted with this on a daily basis. Like I'm very aware that my education and the opportunities that I got, I worked hard for where I am, but I was also always guaranteed like a university degree. Like it was without question, I was going to go to university and get a degree. Like I was always guaranteed a good education, which is the foundation for a successful life, I think. And so how do I live my life acknowledging my privilege, but not feeling guilty about it, and you know, trying to mitigate some of the harm that maybe resulted in me having privilege in the first place. It's a really tricky thing to navigate here because, you know, you see all these literally on the street outside, people sleeping in filth on the side of the road, and there's so many of them, and I'm sure those people hate me. Well, they hate what I represent. They don't hate me personally, but like, and I get it. Like, you know, beggar comes to your window and they're asking for something, and you say no, and it's like a little stab every time, and a stab of guilt and a stab of shame because I could give you money, and I've been placed in a much more privileged life than you did, and we did, both of us didn't ask for where we ended up. So
The question, so you want me?
question is like, yeah, like how do you acknowledge your privilege and live with it, but also not feel like you have to walk around beating yourself up and being like, I'm so sorry to have been born in a fortunate position.
So here's what comes to mind immediately when you say that. I think because I say this, and I think it's so important that I think we all have privilege. So what I say is, when you ask how do you live your life of privilege, I say with gratefulness, with humility,
Yeah.
with
No
an insatiable curiosity, and authentically. So I'll go one by one. I said gratefully because you're right. We didn't choose the privilege I have. None of us have, right? I say with humility because that is when you with humility, that is with a lack of entitlement to me, because it's acknowledging not only have I not granted myself this privilege, I acknowledge that it puts me in a position that others aren't. So
And it doesn't make me better than anyone
right,
else.
but I'm aware.
Yeah.
Humility is like to me an awareness as well.
Yeah.
You know, I say with an insatiable curiosity because as a result of that privilege, there are experiences
You get
that
to have.
not only did you get to have, there's experiences that you don't have perspective on.
Yeah.
So that curiosity allows you to be able to engage with others and tap into their experiences and to truly potentially understand, why something may exist. And then I say with authenticity, because sometimes as a result of privilege, and I say specifically white people, they feel like they don't know what to do. Like, oh, I'm about to fuck up. Or like,
Or they just live their lives completely oblivious to anyone else and are the center of their own universe.
or sometimes that you're aware, you are aware, but you're scared to make a mistake. You're scared to offend someone.
Yeah, because you almost like you have so much that was given to you that you didn't necessarily earn.
All right.
So you kind of have to operate from a place of like, I don't know, almost like obsequiousness, if that's the right term, like that people can always knock you down for that reason.
Yeah.
And you kind of can become an easy target, I guess.
So
I'm scared of saying something like this interview. I thought like, oh my God, like what if I say something about race in South Africa? My like niche privileged white dude perspective on race in South Africa. It is like a minefield for saying something's going to enrage so many people, and like putting my foot in my mouth. It's something you think about because people want to target the person who was privileged. People love to tear a statue down or
I understand that.
Yeah.
So the reason I say authentically is because I understand that exists, but what it allows you to do, or any person with privilege, is acknowledge and kind of get that out the way. Is acknowledge, hey, authentically asking those questions like, hey, I think this. Like, what do you think about it? Until we engage with people authentically, all of us,
and with the right intentions. Like it's about the intention behind it.
Absolutely.
Like you can say, I might say something problematic, but my intention is to learn.
Right.
So forgive me if my background and stuff has led me to saying something problematic or not understanding someone else's perspective, but my intention is I want to.
Right.
So we're like probably gonna fuck it up a few times, but hopefully I would get to a place where...
And my hope is when you're engaging in those circumstances, like you're not always going to engage with people who are understanding, right?
No.
Or have the perspective that this person may not understand. But what I think that authenticity affords us is an opportunity to progress. You know what I mean? So that's why I say, authenticity, although it's tough, right? And as you feel a target, as you may feel like you're a target, because you're privileged, I think the other side is that people who may not have that same privilege, and specifically because we're talking about race, I'll go there. Those people maybe feel targeted on a regular basis because they don't
You're
have the
saying I
privilege.
might be, yeah,
You
no,
know what
like
I mean?
a
No.
daily target, yeah,
Yeah, so I'm not shaming you
by
for
the
that.
structure of the whole country,
And I think what we can all do as people, to be honest, to kind of make spaces more and I hate it's a cliche, but it's the first thing that's in mind. But make safer spaces for us all to engage in. It's to kind of take some of the. I mean, it's kind of to release some of the shame. You know what I mean from other individuals. So, for instance, like I said, there's nothing wrong with you feeling that way. Like, oh shit, I'm gonna be a target. You know what I mean? Because it's nothing. And I'm not shaming you by saying, well, the other side of that is those people feel like a target
they're
every
already
day.
a target,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's not.
yeah,
There's no shame in it.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? It's just saying like, hey, these are the facts.
situation, yeah.
Sometimes when we have these conversations, a person will be like, well, how dare you? And again, though people's feelings are valid and as a result of their lived experiences, understood. I think I'm just kind of illustrating how I feel like not only you and I, but a lot of us can engage more deeply and authentically if we
And to
kind of
just break the
take.
ice,
Yeah,
and have
yeah,
those conversations out in the open and not have them just be
yeah,
tension, and so we just
absolutely,
stay away from each other because it's hard conversations to have,
absolutely.
and I think that is, I think a lot of white people here live with the knowledge that they have benefited hugely from apartheid, and it's like a shameful thing to acknowledge, so they kind of even retreat even further into
Yeah,
their like ivory towers and stuff, and they just like, because it's hard to confront that
yeah,
reality, and to also, like you may say I want equality and I want like everyone in the country to be afforded the same opportunities, but that might mean less opportunities for you if you're from the group that's received an
uh,
inordinate amount of opportunities.
so tell me why you believe that. Why do you believe that more opportunities for something else means less for someone that has, like, tell me your thought
Well, like,
process.
so for here's an example, is like the government implements black economic empowerment programs which stipulate quotas
Uh,
for the number of white people versus black people that have to be employed in a company.
okay.
So it's quite controversial, but like I interviewed for a job at a bank when I graduated university, and they wanted to place me on their IT team because I did computer science, and they couldn't. There was no quota for a white guy on the team,
Mm,
so they then offered me a job in like the finance department, because then a year later they could transfer me into the IT department. So there was like this weird back door into getting into the IT
yeah,
department. And I understand why those systems are in place, but then you can see why the people who normally would have had access to these things, if it means losing them, like people are happy with the status quo, is what I'm
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
when they're
yeah.
the beneficiaries of the
Absolutely.
status quo, and they may pay lip service to like posting an Instagram post and being like, oh, I'm anti-racist or whatever, but
Yeah,
like when it boils down on how anti-racist are you, if it means a family of Zulus are going to move into the house next door, are you still anti-racist?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
No, that's interesting, and I think none of our systems of, I want to call it reconciliation,
yeah,
or in the states, the traditional affirmative action, like none of those systems are perfect, but I think their attempt and intention is to kind
yeah,
of repair
yeah,
some of
for
the
sure.
remnants of our
And I
history.
think look, I think BE has worked to some degree, and I think it's the reason why in like Johannesburg you'll see affluent black families at fancy restaurants and stuff, and I think that's because of 20 years of directed focus at giving people up, like, but it's almost like you're now enforcing a quota and you're saying we need 20 black people and only 5 white people, but it's almost like putting a band-aid on a problem, and you might end up with an unskilled workforce because you've enforced a quota that
But
addresses something, but actually it needs to be more systemic than that. It needs to be like we need to get kids in schools from a young age, and so that when it comes time to applying for these jobs, 20 of them are qualified black people. It's not just we forcing you into these positions simply because you're black or you're white. And
So
because
I think it's two pronged, right? Because I think it's interesting something said. So I do believe in any system, and again, I am speaking and like humbly. What time are we at? Okay, so okay,
we're running out.
okay. So humbly, of course, I'm not a person that's from here, but seeing that there's some similarities in the dynamics in the States as well, I believe it's two pronged, right? I think you need a systematic approach, right? But I think that there's an assumption sometimes in the system. So when you just said like the BEE, if there's a quota, which is, I think, potentially it has its own issues or affirmative action, the assumption is that you're going to put people in places that aren't qualified. My problem with that is, why is the assumption that they aren't qualified? Like maybe it's that these things are here to ensure that we're finding the qualified people that may not have previously had an experience. Now, I'm not sure if the application here, specifically in South Africa, and if they are treating it in that way. But back home, it's like that. Why it seems as though often the assumption is that, oh, these programs are putting unqualified people in these places rather than affording these people
qualified people
exactly that, because of the people who are in power of hiring, or you're hiring
the
people,
gatekeepers are dismissing
or
qualified people
purposely or on accident. Maybe you're subconscious, and maybe it's like, hey, I just like working around the people that I like. Well, traditionally what that's happening is you're going to get your friend, you're going to get your friend's friends, people that you're comfortable with. You're not going to do that extra legwork to ensure
James that.
So so that is saying like, hey, this person literally can be just as qualified, if not more. It's just that we're going to make sure that this person is afforded an opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
And so I say that because you said, it sounded like the, kind of like the presupposition or was that, if this program exists, you're gonna end up with unqualified people. And so I think it's both. You have a systematic approach,
but
and then you also have to.
Yeah, you're right in saying that like a lot of people would have been dismissed and their application wouldn't even get through if these systems weren't in place. But I don't know, like with anything, a system that's implemented like that in the government is so ripe for abuse. And so you end up with situations where it's like you'll have rules like an executive board of a company needs to have at least 2 black people on the board, right? And then so some companies will just literally have like a token black person on their board who collects like an executive salary but like isn't really doing anything. It's like just to meet BEE criteria so that you are then eligible to apply for like government tenders for jobs or whatever. So like as soon as you formalize anything as like a rule, people are going to find ways to like abuse that system.
That's absolutely true.
But I agree, like the intentions are right, and something needed to be done, right? Like something needed to be put into place to try and make practical changes to address what was the opposite during apartheid, where systems were put in place, practical systems were put in place to suppress the opportunities. So you have to do the opposite. And people are always going to be greedy, and they're always going to be corrupt people who abuse it. But by and large, I agree with it. I think it was necessary, and it probably has had an overall beneficial result.
So I think we're also experiencing something similar to what you say about like so that in the States right now, one thing that's really popular or in discussion is the Rooney Rule. And the Rooney Rule is in the NFL. It requires NFL teams. It's in American football, and it requires those NFL teams to at least consider a black coach. And
consider?
They don't have to hire, but it's just making sure that black coaches get considered in the hiring process. But there's a current lawsuit because they believe that just the rule, like you said, the way the rule exists doesn't ensure that people are hired. It just allows people to circumvent the system or just utilize it strategic so that they meet the qualification to do what they please. But I know we're low on time, so I think I want to touch on two other things that I believe are important. The first thing was when you spoke about intention.
Yeah.
One, we were having a conversation the other day, and you said like, yeah, I'm a white South African. I understand the dynamics. I understand it exists. I understand the unfair. But basically, your sentiment was my experience is is what it is. Until I was 18, I haven't, and you mentioned it, I haven't experienced people people of
Yes.
color or black people outside of service.
Yeah.
I didn't have any peers until I was an adult.
Yeah.
So if all of my friends, and you can correct me if I'm misquoting you or
Yeah.
misexpressing, but you were like, if all my friends who already are, how am I supposed to, uh, you know, ch- change my lived experience? Like, how am I supposed to be a better, how am I supposed to engage differently with people of color? Like you said, like, am I just supposed to go around collecting?
Yeah, like I need a black friend.
Yeah. So, I think, I think that's interesting to me because when you said that, I was kind of like, that makes perfect sense. I think I was stumped because I was like, I don't know if I have a specific answer for that. And that's why I think when you say engaging with privilege, I think it's engaging authentically. And I think if you are intentional in the way that like we live our lives, then we can have, it's not just, I don't think going out in the street and be like, hey, black dude, like,
Yeah.
but I think it's about in your experiences. Like honestly, I think you've done that because one, we're sitting here. We're sitting here for a few reasons. One, we serendipitously met when we were part of a travel cohort, and we traveled the world. Well, I
Which was a result of my privilege, by the way.
well, yeah, well, I
Fact
mean,
that I was there.
agreed, right? But I say, but as a result of you being willing to engage authentically, when I asked you,
Sure, yeah.
like, hey, would you be my roommate? You were open to
And I
doing so.
appreciate that you were doing that because you made such a conscious effort to do that with pretty much everyone and get an insight into everyone there.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people would have been happy to just stick with their one or two.
Quickly, I think that's important. Do you mind if we talk about why I decided like, hey, we should be roommates? Is that okay for us to talk about quickly?
Sure, I mean, I just assumed you were trying to get to
I
know
never told you. I never told you.
was
So
there a
this is the thing.
specific reason.
There was a specific
Oh,
reason. So well, there's different types of people. So as a person, for me, like intentionally, I think intention is important as well.
yeah,
And so I wanted to get to know different people from different backgrounds,
yeah,
etc. Um, and so while I chose like a myriad of different people, I also identified you as someone that I wanted to stay with because you're a cool person, you're South African, but also because like your sexual orientation as well. That like not in a but
you just want it because you don't know gay people, any gay
well,
people.
no, it wasn't because I don't know gay people,
Yeah,
and this is and I'm open to and authentically talking about this because it's
yeah,
not something I'm ashamed of. I think it was as a part of my evolution, as
yeah,
a part of like my growth as a black person in America. Like we have a very difficult situation with like the homosexual community.
like homophobia in that
Yes.
community. Yeah,
So as a part of my own evolution of
yeah,
growing out of the place where I'm from, the people I were around in high school, I was in a continual process of evolution.
yeah. So you
I
were basically trying to unlearn some
I was trying to
attitudes, maybe.
I was trying to continue to evolve
Yeah,
and become honestly more comfortable in my existence
yeah.
with having more friendly and deeper relationships with someone who I hadn't experienced. And you were one of those people. That was intentional.
You should have told me that.
I thought we did talk
We
about
might
that.
have, maybe. I don't remember, like, me being gay, being the reason.
But it's not
It
the
wasn't
reason,
yeah,
you know
sure,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So, and I think it's tough to have the conversation
Yeah.
because when you
Yeah,
say that, it makes it sound
it's
like
hey, I grew up in a family that don't like your kind. Let me
that's
spend a
not,
month with you.
that wasn't
I
the,
know,
that
I'm not
wasn't,
oversimplifying. But it's,
yeah,
I think that's a very mature thing to do, to
yeah,
like go where you might, the least about someone
yeah,
and say, I'm gonna go and live with this person and see how they exist on a day-to-day basis to just like broaden my understanding.
yeah. Broaden my understanding,
Yeah.
but also like making myself like, and there were different reasons for other people. Like, hey, I like maybe you're different. Hey, like, but with you, it was partially like, hey, this year I have a couple people on the program. It wasn't something I thought about before. We're just existing, and I'm like, that's something I want to improve about myself. And so as a result, like I'm going to do this intentionally. I think I'm gonna be honest, Grant. I think we did kind of chat about. There's no way but it's been 4
I
years.
remember you saying I want to spend a month with you. So we definitely had conversations about that. Yeah. I guess maybe it didn't register as much for me how much of an intentional thing it was for you.
We're talking about attention, and so yes, it was my intention, but we're talking about why authenticity and engaging allows you to be able to receive me. I was someone also that you hadn't experienced, and we talked about it. So I think all of us, when we have certain privilege, right? In that circumstance, I think it's actually perfect for our conversation. In that circumstance, I guess I had the privilege in society of not being treated differently because I'm heterosexual, and in my privilege, I had experienced people saying or not treating homosexual individuals with the same respect or allowing them to live as freely, as I would walk the earth as a heterosexual or, cisgendered male. So similarly, you had not maybe experienced someone like me, but you allowed, yourself to engage with me authentically as well. And I think that kind of dynamic is how.
That's how we end up like loving people,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Having a peaceful society.
Absolutely.
It's like understanding people who are different from you and humanizing.
Being willing to engage authentically. Yeah. So I think the last question I'll say is, I mean, I think we just answered it, to be honest. I'm going to say, like, how do we, as people who are always different backgrounds, how do we exist and engage
And understand
and develop a more to create a more understanding and empathetic society? And I think
you go there with the right intentions and you be authentic and honest.
Absolutely.
And say, these are things I don't know. I'd like to learn them from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the only way, really.
Absolutely.
This has been a very interesting conversation.
Grant,
thank you so much.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for chatting with me. And I'm grateful not only for our time abroad, but time here. And I hope we get to kick it at least once more.
I'd like that. Elsewhere in the world, I'm sure, too.
Absolutely. So one more housekeeping thing, if you don't mind. I just want you to say your first and last name into the camera, and then this is my extended family. Like, I'm Grant, and this is my extended family. That's it.